The rain tapped softly on the windows of the countryside house, a steady rhythm that filled the otherwise quiet evening. Emma stepped inside, carrying her small suitcase, and felt the familiar warmth of her in-laws' home. She had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks, a chance to escape the city noise and spend time with David's family. But now, standing in the entryway, she felt a flicker of nervousness. Being alone with James, her father-in-law, while David was away for work, always made her slightly uneasy, though she had no reason to be. James was kind, thoughtful, and had always treated her like a daughter. Yet there was an unspoken distance between them that she couldn't quite bridge. The living room smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. A fire burned softly in the fireplace, flickering shadows across the walls. Emma set her suitcase down and walked toward the couch, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The house creaked gently, familiar sounds that made her feel both comforted and slightly uneasy. She had grown up in a city apartment where everything was precise and new, so these old floorboards, the soft unevenness of the walls, the faint, musty smell of history, all felt strangely intimate. She sank into the couch and picked up a book she had brought along, hoping to lose herself in its pages until David returned. Minutes passed. The sound of rain outside was rhythmic and soothing. Yet inside, Emma felt a quiet tension she couldn't place. She turned the pages, but her mind wandered. She thought about David, about their life together, and about the small ways this house made her feel nostalgic, even though she had only visited a few times. Every photo on the walls seemed to whisper stories she didn't fully know. The laughter of David as a child, family holidays long forgotten. Moments frozen in yellowed photographs said, all felt alive in this quiet room. A knock on the door startled her. Emma closed the book and looked up. James stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden box with a careful grip. "I thought you might like to see these," he said, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. Emma felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't explain why. There was something about the way James looked tonight. Not different, yet different. Something warmer in his eyes. She nodded and gestured for him to come in. He walked over and sat on the couch beside her, placing the box carefully on his lap. Inside were photographs, old and faded from decades past. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she picked one up. Picture of a young David laughing on the beach, sand sticking to his sun-kissed skin. She smiled softly, almost laughing at the memory she didn't actually have, imagining her husband as a carefree boy. James leaned closer, pointing to another picture. "That was your mother-in-law on her first trip abroad," he said, his voice carrying both nostalgia and a quiet longing. Emma listened intently. She realized she had never really seen James like this vulnerable, reflective human in a way that made him seem closer, yet more mysterious at the same time. They flipped through photo after photo, each one a tiny window into the past. Emma saw David as a small boy playing with a toy train, then as a teenager at his high school graduation. She saw James younger, softer around the eyes, a hint of unspoken sadness in his smile. The more they looked, the more Emma felt a strange, compelling mix of emotions immersion for the man who raised her husband, empathy for the loneliness she imagined he sometimes felt, and an odd, unexplainable connection she couldn't name. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The rain outside softened, a faint drizzle now, and the fire in the fireplace flickered, casting dancing shadows over the photographs. Emma found herself laughing at a silly old picture of James in a costume, then growing quiet at a photo of a long-lost family dog. She realized that every image carried a story, and each story pulled her closer to understanding James in ways she hadn't before. At one point, James paused, looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It wasn't judgment or authority, but something softer, deeper, recognition of her heart, her emotions, and perhaps her loneliness too. "Emma," he said gently, "these pictures, they remind me that life moves fast, and yet moments like these, they stay with you. We forget how much we carry with us, the little joys, the little sorrows. His voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with feeling. Emma felt a lump in her throat. She nodded, unable to speak at first, overwhelmed by the quiet intimacy of the moment. The conversation turned to stories. James spoke of his childhood, the small adventures he had with friends, the mistakes he made, and the lessons he had learned. Emma listened, captivated, hanging on to every word. She shared her own experiences too, softly at first, and then with more ease. She told him about her childhood dreams, her fears, and the quiet worries she sometimes carried. James listened, without interruption, offering a nod, a smile, or a small comforting word when needed. It was easy to forget the gap in their roles, father-in-law and daughter-in-laws. They were simply two souls sharing an evening, lost in stories and human connection. Time passed differently in that living room. The outside world seemed to disappear, leaving only the warmth of firelight, the scent of old books, and the soft murmur of voices sharing secrets and memories. Emma realized that she had been craving something like this connection, understanding, someone who would listen without judgment and offer warmth in return. And for James, she could see the subtle relief of a man who found it rare to share his past so openly. Finally, the box of photographs was empty, but neither of them felt the night had ended. There was a quiet tension now, unspoken but palpable, as if the shared stories had opened a door that neither wanted to close. The house was still, except for the soft tapping of rain, and Emma felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with comfort. She wondered what it was about this moment that felt so important, so delicate, and so full of possibility. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, James stood and offered a small smile. "I should let you rest," he said. But there was a softness in his tone, an invitation in the way he lingered for a moment at the doorway. Emma nodded, feeling a flutter of emotions she didn't fully understand. As she watched him leave the room, she realized that tonight had changed something. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, profound, and deeply emotional. The kind of moment that lingers long after it's over, shaping thoughts and feelings in ways words cannot fully capture. Emma sat back on the couch, staring at the now empty box of photographs. Her heart was a mix of warmth, curiosity, and something she hadn't expected, a gentle longing, not for romance, but for connection, for understanding, for moments that mattered. And as she finally picked up her book again, she realized that the night was far from over, that the quiet intimacy of the evening had only just begun, and that her connection with James, subtle as it was, would follow her into the hours ahead. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle, and the countryside house settled into silence. Inside, Emma felt the first stirrings of an emotional journey, one that would unfold in unexpected ways, touching hearts, revealing vulnerabilities, and bringing two people closer in ways neither could have anticipated. The night stretched ahead, full of possibilities, with the soft promise of a connection that was rare, fragile, and beautiful in its quiet, understated way. The storm outside had grown stronger, rain lashing against the windows with a steady rhythm. Inside, the house felt cozier than ever, the flickering fireplace casting shadows across the walls. Emma had been reading quietly when a sudden flash of lightning lit up the room, and she realized the power had gone out. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from the unexpected stillness the darkness brought. A soft knock came at the door. Emma's heart jumped, though she knew who it was. James stepped in, holding a few candles and a small box of matches. "I thought we could light these," he said softly. His voice was calm, grounding, and something about it made Emma feel both safe and alert at the same time. She nodded, and he set the candles around the room, their warm glow pushing back the shadows. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood there for a moment, both noticing the quiet that had settled between them. It wasn't awkward, it felt like a pause in time, space where nothing else existed but the two of them and the storm outside. James finally broke the silence, picking up one of the old photographs from the box on the table. "Do you want to see more?" he asked. Emma nodded, moving closer to sit on the edge of the sofa as he joined her. They began flipping through the photos, but tonight the conversation was different. Instead of laughing or telling light stories, James shared memories that carried weight. He spoke about moments of loss, of regrets, of things he had never told anyone. Emma listened intently, feeling the raw honesty in his voice. She realized she had never seen this side of him so human, so vulnerable. The man who had always seemed distant and composed was now opening himself in ways that pulled at her heart. "I lost touch with some people I should have kept close," James said, his eyes distant. "Sometimes I wonder if I was too focused on work, too focused on being responsible, to notice what really mattered." Emma felt a tug in her chest. She had heard these words from her husband before, about lessons learned too late, but hearing them from James made them feel more immediate, more real. "I understand," she said softly. The room was quiet except for the rain, and Emma found herself drawn to the calm presence of James. She wanted to ask him more, to know his thoughts, his feelings, but words felt heavy. So instead, she listened. She let him speak, sharing stories of love lost, of friendships that faded, of dreams that never came true. With each revelation, Emma felt herself understanding him better, seeing beyond the polite, reserved man she had always known. At one point, James paused, glancing at her with a look that seemed to pierce through the quiet haze of the storm. "Emma," he said gently, "do you ever feel like life moves too fast and we miss the small things?" She met his gaze and nodded, unable to find words. She did feel that way about her life, her marriage, even herself. The way he asked it wasn't like a question for conversation. It was almost a confession, a shared recognition of something they both felt but rarely expressed. Emma's mind raced as they continued talking. She thought about her husband, about her own life, and about the loneliness that sometimes crept in despite being surrounded by people who loved her. James didn't offer advice. He didn't try to solve problems. Instead, he offered something far rarer: understanding, empathy, and the permission to feel deeply. And as the candlelight flickered across his face, she realized she had never felt so connected to someone outside of her marriage, in a way that was innocent yet profoundly emotional. The storm's intensity seemed to mirror the conversation. Lightning illuminated the room in sharp flashes, and thunder rolled softly in the distance. Emma felt herself leaning slightly closer, drawn to the quiet strength of James's presence. It wasn't desire, at least, not in a physical sense, but a longing for emotional closeness. For someone who could truly see her and accept her without judgment. James noticed, too, in the way his eyes softened when they met hers, in the careful attentiveness in his voice. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. They moved around the living room, sharing stories while the candles burned low. Emma laughed quietly at a photo of young David attempting to ride a bicycle, and James chuckled, the sound warm and unguarded. Then, without thinking, Emma shared something personal, a secret fear she had carried since childhood, something she had never told anyone. James listened, silent, letting her words settle in the space between them. When she finished, he placed a reassuring hand on hers. The gesture was simple, protective, and filled with a kind of emotional intimacy that startled her with its depth. "Thank you for trusting me," he said softly. Emma's chest tightened. She realized that tonight had changed something. It wasn't dramatic or scandalous. It was subtle, almost invisible, but undeniably powerful. She felt seen, understood, and valued in a way that made her heart ache with emotion. James smiled faintly, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He didn't push further, didn't linger in a way that would be uncomfortable. He simply shared the moment, allowing their bond to grow naturally. The storm began to soften, rain turning to a gentle drizzle, and the night felt suspended in a delicate balance of emotion and reflection. Emma realized she had been craving this type of connection, not with anyone else, but with someone who could hold space for her feelings without judgment. She thought about her husband, about family, and about the complex ways people connect. James's presence had opened something in her heart, a sense of trust, comfort, and emotional closeness that was rare and beautiful. Eventually, the conversation slowed. They sat in silence, listening to the rain, each absorbed in thoughts and reflections. Emma felt a sense of anticipation, not anxiousness, but a quiet curiosity about what the night might bring. She didn't know what the future held, but she understood that moments like this were precious, fleeting, and meaningful. They didn't need to be dramatic. They didn't need to be romantic in the traditional sense. They were about hearts connecting, about souls recognizing one another in the quiet intimacy of shared stories and unspoken understanding. When the candles finally burned low, James suggested they move to the bedroom to check the window and see the storm fading into the night. Emma hesitated but followed. Something about this felt right. Not unusual, not inappropriate, but a continuation of the trust and connection they had built. Sitting by the window, they watched the rain soften, the sky gradually clearing, and the world outside becoming calm again. In that moment, Emma realized that this night, this stormy, candlelit night filled with stories, confessions, and quiet laughter had created a bond that was rare and profound. It was a connection based on empathy, understanding, and shared humanity. She felt emotions she had not expected: gratitude, warmth, and a quiet, almost protective affection for James. He, in turn, seemed to feel the same, his calm presence radiating reassurance and trust as the night wore on. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The storm outside was fading, but the storm of emotions inside felt settled, as if they had both found a moment of clarity in the darkness. She knew the night was far from over, that the emotional journey they had begun would continue, unfolding gently with honesty, warmth, and mutual respect. And as she sat quietly beside James, watching the first hints of moonlight filter through the clouds, she understood that some connections were timeless, built not on desire, but on trust, vulnerability, and the courage to open one's heart fully, even in unexpected ways. The storm outside had finally softened, leaving the world glistening with raindrops that reflected the pale light of the moon. Inside the countryside house, the air still carried the quiet tension and warmth from the evening's conversations. Emma and James had moved to the bedroom not for privacy in any improper sense, but because it offered a wide window with the best view of the clearing sky. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender from the sachets on the dresser, and the soft glow of the remaining candles gave everything a golden hue. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting loosely on her lap, while James stood by the window, watching the clouds slowly drift away. She felt a strange mixture of anticipation and comfort. She wasn't sure why being in the bedroom felt different, but it wasn't awkward. It felt honest, like a continuation of the trust and connection they had built in the living room. James turned to her with a small smile. "The storm seems to be passing," he said. His voice was steady, calm, but there was a softness in it that made her heart beat a little faster. Emma nodded, letting her gaze wander to the window. The rain left tiny rivulets on the glass, and beyond them, the countryside was quiet, almost dreamlike. "It's beautiful," she whispered. James moved closer, standing beside her, not invading her space, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. "It is," he agreed. "Nights like these remind us that life can be harsh, but it's also full of small, precious moments." They spoke for a while in silence, listening to the gentle drip of water outside and the occasional distant rumble of thunder fading into the night. The silence was not empty. It was full of understanding. Emma felt an unexpected weight lift from her shoulders. She had spent years managing responsibilities, trying to balance her life, and sometimes she felt invisible in her own world. Now, in this quiet room with James, she felt seen in a way that was both tender and grounding. "Emma," James said after a moment, his voice softer than before, "sometimes I forget how important it is to just be present, to listen, to really listen." She turned to him, meeting his eyes, and saw a vulnerability there she had not noticed before. He was a man of experience, of strength, and yet tonight he allowed himself to be simply human. Something inside Emma stirred a mix of respect, affection, and deep emotional connection. She found herself sharing things she had never said aloud before. Stories of small failures, quiet fears, moments of loneliness. Each confession was met with gentle acknowledgement, with no judgment, only understanding. James listened with intent, sometimes nodding, sometimes letting the silence hold the weight of her words. Emma realized that what she had felt earlier at the connection, the unspoken intimacy, was not just a fleeting feeling. It was real and it was safe. It was built on honesty, empathy, and mutual respect. James spoke too, revealing memories that he had buried over the years. He talked about dreams he once had, loves he had lost, friendships that had drifted apart. Each story carried a weight of emotion, yet he told them with calm reflection, not regret. Emma felt drawn in, wanting to know more, to understand the man who had raised her husband, who had quietly shaped the family she now loved. She realized that the bond forming between them was rare, not in any scandalous way, but in its depth and sincerity. At one point, Emma instinctively leaned her head on James's shoulder, seeking comfort and grounding. He placed a hand gently on her back, a simple gesture that communicated protection and care without any hint of impropriety. They sat that way for a while, listening to the softened rain and sharing the silence that only comes when two people understand each other. In that quiet, Emma felt a profound sense of trust. She realized that vulnerability could be beautiful, that sharing one's heart could create a bond stronger than words alone. The conversation turned to dreams, unfulfilled desires, places they wanted to visit, lives they wished they had lived. Emma spoke of travels she longed for but had never taken. James shared stories of the world he had seen and also of the moments he had missed. There was an almost tangible longing in the room, not for each other, but for life itself, for connection, for moments that mattered. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, a gentle emotional intensity that made the evening unforgettable. As the night deepened, Emma found herself laughing softly at one of James's anecdotes about David as a child. The sound was light, genuine, and filled the room with warmth. James smiled, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "You know," he said, "he always did have a sense of adventure, even as a little boy. I suppose some things never change." Emma laughed again, feeling lighter, freer than she had in months. The storm outside had passed, but inside, storm of emotions had found its resolution in quiet intimacy, shared stories, and human connection. Time passed unnoticed. They moved closer to the window, watching the night sky clearing, the first stars appearing. Emma felt a wave of emotion, gratitude, warmth, and a gentle, almost protective affection for James. She realized she was not alone in her feelings. He responded in subtle ways through his gestures, his attentive listening, the softness in his eyes. They weren't crossing boundaries, but they were building something meaningful. Trust, understanding, and a deep emotional bond at one point. James placed a hand on hers, lightly, not lingering too long, but enough to remind her of the connection they shared. Emma looked up at him and smiled, a quiet acknowledgement that she understood. No words were needed. The moment was enough. The emotional intimacy they shared was rare and beautiful, born from honesty, empathy, and the courage to open their hearts. The night felt suspended in time. Outside, the countryside lay quiet and glistening, bathed in moonlight. Inside, Emma and James sat together, hearts quietly aligned, understanding each other in ways that were unspoken but deeply felt. It wasn't love in the romantic sense. It was something rare bond formed through shared vulnerability, respect, and emotional honesty. Emma realized that sometimes the most profound connections happen not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet moments of understanding and trust. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice soft but steady. "Emma, tonight has been unexpected, but I think it's reminded me of the importance of these moments, of being present, of listening, of caring." Emma nodded, her heart full, feeling a sense of peace and anticipation for what the rest of the night might bring. She knew that this emotional journey had only just begun, and that the bond they had forged would guide the hours ahead. leading to moments of reflection, connection, and quiet. Heartfelt intimacy. As they turned their attention back to the clearing sky. Watching the clouds part and the stars shine through, Emma felt a sense of calm and purpose. The storm outside was gone, but inside, something new had begun: a gentle understanding, a shared emotional closeness, and the knowledge that some connections are timeless, built not on desire, but on empathy, honesty, and the courage to open one's heart. And as she leaned slightly toward James, feeling the warmth of human connection, Emma knew that the night was far from over, that more discoveries awaited, and that the quiet intimacy they had shared was only the beginning of a journey neither would forget. Morning light spilled through the bedroom window, painting the room in soft golden hues. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air fresh and scented faintly with rain. Emma stirred, stretching and blinking against the brightness. The previous night felt like a dream, but the warmth in her chest told her it had been real. She looked around the room, still softly lit by the fading candlelight, and saw James quietly sitting in the armchair by the window, sipping tea. His eyes lifted as he noticed her awake, and he gave a small, gentle smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and familiar. Emma smiled back, feeling a soft sense of comfort. The night had been long, filled with conversations, confessions, and quiet emotional closeness that neither of them had expected. They had shared stories, fears, and reflections, building a connection that was deep, honest, and unshakable. Now, in the soft morning light, that bond felt solid, almost tangible. Emma moved to join him in the armchair, and they sipped their tea in companionable silence. There was no need for words. The quiet between them was full of understanding. She thought about the way James had listened to her, truly listened without judgment. She thought about the stories he had shared, the vulnerability he had shown, and the subtle ways he had made her feel seen, valued, and understood. It wasn't romantic love, at least not in the usual sense. It was something deeper, an emotional intimacy that few people ever experienced. As the minutes passed, Emma found herself reflecting on her relationship with David. She loved him dearly, and she knew that their bond was strong. But the night with James had reminded her of the importance of human connection beyond daily routines and responsibilities. Sometimes people who were part of your life in expected ways could surprise you by revealing unexpected depths. James had done that. He had shown her patience, understanding, and a sense of shared humanity that left her both comforted and inspired. James spoke softly, breaking the quiet. "I'm glad you stayed last night," he said. "It's rare to have someone to share thoughts with, someone who listens without expectation." Emma nodded. She understood perfectly. It had been rare indeed, a night where two people could be entirely themselves without masks or pretense. She felt a lump in her throat at the thought of how precious such moments were, and she realized she wanted to carry that memory with her, not as something fleeting, but as something enduring, a reminder of the strength of empathy and trust. The room was filled with warmth, not just from the sunlight, but from the emotional connection that lingered. Emma thought about the gentle gestures of last night, the hand on hers, the comforting presence, the shared laughter and quiet moments. These gestures had been small, simple, but their impact was immense. They had created a foundation of understanding and respect, a bond that transcended typical family relationships. She realized that sometimes intimacy was not about romance or physical closeness. It was about shared vulnerability, about feeling seen and heard in a way that nurtured the heart. They talked again, this time about the day ahead. Emma suggested they take a short walk outside to enjoy the fresh air and see the aftermath of the storm. James agreed, and together they stepped onto the porch. The countryside looked transformed. Grass glistened with raindrops. Puddles reflected the morning sky, and birds had begun to return, singing softly. Emma felt a sense of renewal. Just as the world had been washed clean by the rain, her own heart felt lighter, refreshed by the night of connection and understanding. As they walked slowly along the path behind the house, Emma felt the full weight of gratitude. She realized that the bond she shared with James was one of trust and human closeness, not dependent on roles or expectations. It had been built through conversation, empathy, and quiet moments of emotional honesty. Every laugh, every shared story, every small gesture from last night had strengthened that bond. And she carried it with her as a gentle, comforting presence. James looked at her with a kind smile. "You know," he said, "life doesn't give us many nights like this. Moments where we can just be ourselves without fear or pretense." Emma nodded, understanding completely. She thought about her own life, the routines, the pressures, and realized how important it was to cherish moments of human connection. This wasn't about drama or excitement. It was about trust, care, and the rare ability to feel understood by another person. They returned inside as the sun rose higher, warming the rooms with soft light. Emma helped James place the no-cold teacups in the sink, and they shared quiet conversation about breakfast and the small tasks of the morning. The atmosphere was light, yet the memory of the night lingered like a soft, comforting hum. Emma realized that even in the simplest actions, pouring tea, tidying up, sharing smiles, there was an undercurrent of the connection they had built, a subtle understanding that would stay with her. As David's car pulled into the driveway, Emma felt a sense of anticipation. She loved him, and she knew he would be happy to see her. But she also understood that the night had given her something different, a reminder of the importance of emotional closeness, of sharing oneself honestly, and of the quiet power of empathy. She was ready to embrace the day with gratitude, carrying the warmth of last night's bond as a source of strength and perspective. When David walked through the door, smiling and tired from his work trip, Emma greeted him with a hug that felt full of warmth and love. She realized that the bond she shared with James didn't detract from her marriage. If anything, it deepened her appreciation for both men in her life. James approached, smiling gently, and exchanged a few quiet words with David. There was no awkwardness, only a subtle acknowledgement that last night had been special, meaningful, and transformative, without crossing any boundaries.